So today another medieval history topic that I hope you will appreciate, and this is the Milanese expansionism during the 12th century. Now, I think it's a very important topic that doesn't have a lot of popularity, is often overlooked when thinking about the Middle Ages. There is one reason, I believe, that since Italy didn't have, aside from the south, um, a unitary kingdom proper, because in spite of being there a kingdom of Italy from a jurisdictional and in practice, even from a political point of view, the Italian low Middle Ages are characterized by the expansionism of the so-called comune in Italian. That is essentially the political organization, very often almost in all cases based on the Italian cities that were indeed by far not only the most numerous in Europe, but also in relative terms, but also the more developed, the largest one, the more powerful ones, which in a certain sense obscured the Italian kingdom as such, because indeed there was not really a king there. There were these Germanic kings which usually came to be crowned after they had been crowned kings of Germany and kings of the Romans in Germany, then came to Italy and needed the Italian crown to be crowned in turn as emperors of the Holy Roman Empire in Rome. Um, and when these guys weren't in Italy, or they didn't even come there because maybe they had other troubles in Germany, obviously Italy was left as something on its own, and the cities that were there obviously could take that space that in the absence of a central authority, political authority, was otherwise, free to be taken if we wanna conceive it in this way. I want to talk about the history of Milan because obviously this city, besides being one of the most important and largest cities in Europe at the time, probably the largest, even larger than Paris, was also the city that, in a certain way, triggered the expeditions of Frederick I of Hohenstaufen, so the German emperor that fought so much for recovering Italy and under the imperial crown from Germany, and that was the leader of, Milan was the leader of the so-called Lombard League, or at least the largest political entity that fought more bitterly against the so-called Barbarossa, which in Italian means Red Beard, which was the name given to Frederick I of Hohenstaufen. Today I'm not going to talk about how Milan fought against Frederick. Not only the political context, the international political context of those times, but more in depth and in detail about the expansionism of Milan before the war against Barbarossa, and in fact the way and the reasons why it expanded so much, and which were the results of this. Because even before that, Frederick, as king of Germany, decided to go to Italy and to claim the Italian crown and the imperial crown, and he already had for a long time, even before he was crowned, as a matter of fact. So even his predecessors had a lot of news about Milan behaving in a very a strange way for the mentality of the time, at least the political culture that was especially in place north of the Alps. We can imagine a lot of ambassadors of the minor Lombard cities coming to the German king to tell them, look, Milan is doing the bully here. There is something that doesn't work. They want to invade us. They want to take what is ours. And in fact, even half of a century before uh, the the arrival of Frederick I, Milan had started to extend its own political and economical hegemony over the central portion of the Po Valley. And this happened in different forms. Actually, it wasn't, let's go conquer that place and there it goes. No, Milan was um, uh, most of all an economical power. And you have to think that even if the Italian cities had a sort of mm, centralized government which ruled the city and its own properties and domains, the political unity was not very solid. There were different elements within the citizenry that had different aims, different classes with different interests, with different horizons, even with different culture. Think about the class of the knights that were essentially the same as the rest of European knights. Think about the artisans and those who worked into the guilds and so on. I mean, there was a lot of conflictuality within the city, but we can say that at large the city sort of formed a squad that could whose players could argue within each other, but still made up the squad and still needed to win the match together. And since Milan was a huge economical power and a very important trade center in Europe, um, the unity of these all these citizens was something favorable, and its influence could be used, politically speaking, to extend the power of Milan and of all these and all its citizens all over northern Italy. So the way this Milanese expansion actually took place was a mixture of armed conflicts, so normal wars, because within Milan had obviously a militia that included the knights, the foot soldiers, so this citizen force that was put together as an army and that went fighting other cities most of the times, but also making maybe raids or just being used as a form of deterrence against other anyone basically who was there, not just other cities but even other structures that were installed into the territory, and at the same time using obviously in this sense also diplomacy. So there were agreements, alliances, trying to work together with other cities, which were not like Milan, but in terms of size, but let's say that in their own districts had a similar power and essentially the same goals that the Milanese had. And more subtly, and I'd say more interestingly from a merely political and jurisdictional point of view, trying to overlap Milanese jurisdiction over the local ones, that we are talking about a period in history in which there was not a unitary, uniform law applied, imposed by someone, and all over territory, so that anyone would obey. There was the so-called common right, the idea that every place had a sort of juridical traditions that were recognized sometimes by the public authority, that could be the emperor, the king, or in their name the bishops, or even the cities sometimes, because this is the moment in which the cities are, developing very much under this point of view, and therefore the emperors, when dealing with them, started to tell them, okay, we recognize these rights, and that, I don't know, you can exact taxes from this place in the name of the emperor, and part of it has to go to us, another part you can keep it in the city, and stuff. But in this case, as in most other Italian cities, this was taking place without actually the control of a political, a recognized public authority, let's say, such as the emperor or the king could be. And these cities were actually developing rights on their own and imposing them, obviously, on other comuni and other political entities. And it's quite interesting that in here, and this is very important to stress, there was not just the, let's say in this sense, Milan, in this case, that said, now we expand, and I find, a gap where there is no one else. There was a constant competition with all the other entities, um, all the other powers, if you want, that lived, for instance, in the countryside. There were, for instance, some lords, with feudal lords that lived in the countryside. Italy was not just about cities. There were still the feudality of, that was there, like in any other country that had been at least under the Carolingian Empire and had adopted feudalism, and obviously with other cities. And this is a moment in which cities are not just, they have various form, or better, the comuni have various forms, meaning that most comuni are based on the cities, as we said, but some of them are being born autonomously from, I don't know, from villages put in together, or or in a mountain area in which some certain communities may be, even heterogeneous, the one within others, like lords in accordance with peasants or with bishops, and so on, putting together, forming a comune on their own. So it's an extremely complicated net of relationships between these political entities that surround the city district and are even within it themselves. In 1107 and 1127, Milan defeated respectively the city, militarily speaking, the city of Lodi and the city of Como. These are two cities that are respectively in the south and the north of Milan, which are a good, I think, 40 kilometers one from the other, so they are not, but possibly even more, so that they're not even, it's not a small area. Milan is in the middle, and it's enlarging quite consistently by defeating these comuni. Um, and especially these cities were very important for Milanese expansionism, because Lodi basically the defeat of Lodi allowed Milan to arrive to the Po River. Mm? Lodi is close to the Po and basically had hampered Milan from reaching it, and the Po was one of the most important fluvial highways of the time, so an extremely important communication for trade, and through which goods arrived also to Milan, but passing obviously through other cities that made these trades paying taxes for the goods they made passing. And Como instead was extremely important for the Como is in the north, close to the Alps, and it's an extremely important place for trading with the Transalpine lands from Italy. And at the same time, by expanding around these areas, Milan arrived also in the district of the so-called Saprio, which was a district that was formerly distinct and independent from the Milanese one, um, which extended over the flat and partly hilly terrain between Milan and Como, and around the 40s of the 12th century, the Milanese consuls exercised justice on this Saprio land in substitution to the local counts, and in competition with that of the consuls that were being formed in the lands of the Saprium by the people who inhabited there. And so when Milan destroyed Lodi in 1111, the jurisdiction of Milan consuls extended over the comital territory of Lodi, in in total, let's say. So a huge expansion at the time, getting over and fighting a huge quantity of other political entities that potentially could develop in a way against Milan if this expansion had not taken place. And the important thing of this expansion is that it was at the time accompanied by a routing in the local estates of the Milanese citizens, meaning that the Milanese citizens, so recognized by the Comune of Milan, and being ruled by the consuls that were in Milan, had managed to expand in these areas, seizing properties and controlling the market of these lands, especially in the area of Lodi, and therefore getting many properties of this area, and in particular getting properties from the estates of the local bishop of Lodi, and getting from this one the rights that this bishop as a lord had in vassalatic terms, meaning that there were guys who were possibly even not nobles, who got rights that had been formally given by the king at a certain point to the bishop, and that the bishop at the time was obliged by force, in a certain measure, or by convenience at least, to give to these no one's in feudal perspective, and this is in fact one of the most one of the weirdest aspect of the Italian the expansion of the Italian cities at the time. The idea that in a world, in a Western world largely ruled by aristocracy, where that was obviously linked to nobility and the kings and so on. These guys that came from the commoners, from the people, at a certain point, are able to purchase rights, the rights of these aristocrats, and exercising them in full right. So you understand that when the Germans came to Italy under Frederick Barbarossa, and when they saw what was happening in Italy, I mean, for them, I will be talking about this in another video. For them, it was something absurd, was something incredible, because nothing like that had ever happened before in the empire, and there was a cultural and even anthropological um, incapacity of understanding what was going on there. That would wait very much when the wars between the German Emperor and the Lombard League broke out, because the German Emperor was obviously exercising his own rights, but he couldn't conceive that he could share these rights with the local people who actually had formed them, because these cities had, independently from their the jurisdictional validity of what they had done, um, the legal validity, they had they had developed the cities, they had built bridges, they had worked the lands, they had made a sort of bonification of swamps. They had built a world that was a hell of a rich world, and obviously the emperors needed to take all that for the sake of money, and not leaving even a tiny bit of them to the Italian cities. So what happened is that under Frederick Barbarossa, even those same guys that had been bullied by Milan, for instance, and that had called the emperor for asking for help, basically would have turned against him in the end, because he was, in comparison, even worse than what Milan had done. There are no good guys in here. Always remember that. You can have a right legally, but what happened in there back in the day was really a very fierce competition, a fierce fight with no end, really. So as you understand, Milan had, just for concluding, Milan had expanded, far, far away from its original district. Mm. That, by the way, how did these districts form? Substantially, the comune took the district that originally, from the High Middle Ages, had belonged to the bishop. Because in Italy, we will be talking about that in another video, because in Italy, the German emperors, not managing to control the areas, basically gave the control of the land to the bishops, and the bishops had obviously a power that in this sense was equated to the one of the counts in other areas of the empire, and which coincided with the bishopric. So this area was basically taken from the bishop to the city during this point, and legally speaking, at least that city owned that district. Here Milan goes even beyond, and it starts expanding extremely ambitiously over beyond its own district. So we have seen there were political reasons, economical reasons, there were other ambitions, there were, for instance, groups of nobles, like clubs, really. They were nothing but clubs, or or gangs, if you want, that of nobles that decided to, start this activity. Let's say it was like starting a company, and saying, we get together legally and we share profits and we go raiding and conquering and getting power, and we are one on an only group. Um, Last but not least, really, was also religious play to this, because this is a moment yeah, there is really, about Middle Ages, there is really so much to talk about, but we don't have the time in only one video. There were also a lot of ecclesiastic and religious tensions in this time, that were rooted locally and that were intermingled with wider problems, and especially the conflict between the empire and papacy. And even with trade, on a very long, on a very big scale. So it wasn't just about Milan, and that's why at the beginning of the video I say we don't talk enough about this, because the normal student that opens up a book and sees a political map of Europe at the time is obviously interested by these big blocks like the Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England and stuff. When he sees Milan, he sees just a tiny point, but that tiny point was extremely powerful. We're talking about the richest city in Europe at the time, something amazing that had never been seen in those days. Um, so what happened in Milan was, you know, in proportion extremely more important to what happened in another principality or even a kingdom. Um, and um, and one must always stress the importance of Italian cities during this time. And in the face of this Milanese expansion, what we can say is that the Milanese leadership that eventually would lead the Italic coalition, the very powerful Italic coalition again, in the long struggle with the Barbarossa, did not manage in this. And exactly because of all these reasons, because of the complexity of all these factors, they didn't manage to build up, a uniform and politically compact and territorially compact domination over, the lands over which it had exercised all these powers. There was nothing like a territorial unity. There were too many interests. There was um, a too great social complexity and differentiation to manage to build up something similar to a state, that could govern, um, directly and without media, this area. Think that even in the 14th century the Visconti didn't manage to homogenize the jurisdictions over the regional state that they had built, and was much larger than this that Milan was forming in the 12th century. For instance, in the land of Saprio, about which we were talking about before, in spite of Milanese hegemony, there was a development of other autonomous institutions locally, and even in the district of Lodi, that had been basically overwhelmed by Milanese expansion, the bishop, the one who was setting rights to the guys, to the citizenry of Milan, um, still maintained a lordship, still had properties, still had soldiers, for making you understand what I'm talking about. And the same Lodi eventually would be reborn as a citizenry and a collective political group that would eventually, in fact, renovate the communal experience. Um, I don't know how clear I was in explaining these forms of Milanese expansion in the central and western Po Valley. What I really care about is that you understand the dynamisms of these places in medieval Europe. Think about that. Europe at the time had never seen so much vitality, so much economical growth, so much political development and originality like it was happening in communal Italy. Mm? These guys were all different cities fighting each other, were not united at all, but alone they managed to kick ass to a whole kingdom when the emperor came to to suppress them in a way. And obviously it wasn't really, I think that Barbarossa and the Germans could actually manage to control Italy. It's a very hotly debated topic, but and I'm not really an expert on this period, but um, it's indeed evident that from one side, um, Frederick I made some serious political mistakes, and it's possible that without them, the Germans would have managed to control the Italian communal movement and even to expand into something much bigger and to make the Holy Roman Empire, really a European power. Mm? But there is no time to talk about this now. So thank you for listening and see you next time.